Welcome to Mokena's Front Porch, a Mokena history podcast with Matt Galick and hosted by me, Israel Smith. In episode 5, we discussed the McGovney-Yunker farm and its history, as well as why it's a property that's significant to our town. Because of the work of Jennifer Medema, the McGovney-Yunker farm is forever listed on the National Register of Historic Places and recognized for its significance. In this episode, I sit down and have a conversation with Jennifer about the process she went through to get the farm listed on the National Register, as well as the people that helped her get there. The farm is the only Mokena property that's listed on the National Register, as of now. Jennifer has an incredible library of photos, newspaper, and magazine articles about the farm and the process she went through to get it listed. We will try to share some of those with you through Facebook and Instagram, but for now, enjoy this conversation and learn a little bit more about what it took to get our small town farm listed on the National Register of Historic Places. I am happy to sit this morning with Jennifer Medema. Jennifer, welcome. Thank you for doing this with me and taking some time to talk about the McGovney-Yunker farm.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
And Jennifer is the one that is responsible for the application and getting the Yunker farm on the National Register of Historic Places. So I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation and talk about kind of the process that you went through to get the farm registered, as well as how significant that is. I think a lot of people don't know that the farm is on the register, and I think probably even more people don't know the significance of that. So I think that's something we'd like to talk about a little bit. But first, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in Mokena?
I moved here to Mokena in 2001, and I've been in the same house ever since. I've been here on Front Street, and I've always had an interest in historic architecture. And so myself, I live in a house that's over 150 years old, and if I add a lot of character to that, and it has a lot of its own character. And where my house is positioned, I look out the windows and I can see Yunker Farm. So it was always something that was just a beautiful view out my window and always intrigued me. And then I somehow stumbled across its significance.
How did it come about that you decided to start the process of getting the farm registered?
Well, at the time I went back to school for a degree in interior design, and I took a class on historic preservation. And in that class, there were a number of different papers that we had to write about historic properties. And the one in particular that kind of got this whole thing rolling was that I needed to pick a property that I deemed would be a significant property that could be listed, had potential to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And I was a new resident here in town, and I knew Mokena, myself living in such an old house, I knew there was a lot of history in this town. And sometimes my thought for that paper was I was going to write about the old St. Mary's Church. And I went to the library to start finding information looking specifically for that. And as I was looking in the archives in the back, they have an area with like historic newspapers and things like that. As I kept trying to dig for the church, like more and more, like there'd be an article about this farm that pictures of it. I'm like, oh, that's that farm right outside my window. And I'd read a little bit about it. And I kept thinking I'd want to write about this church, but I just kept digging through their archives and finding more and more information about Yunker Farm. And then as I was reading all this information, I realized that property was the property that I needed to write about because it had such significance. And not to say that St. Mary's Church didn't, but for a starting point in this town, this was the place that needed to be registered. Or at this time, I didn't know I was going to take it that far, but just needed to be the paper that I was going to write about. And after submitting the paper, my instructor said that I really stumbled across something and it had real potential and could possibly be listed on the register. And from that, I thought, why not? Maybe we should get it listed.
Any idea, who that instructor might be?
God, for the life of me, I cannot remember
Might be an
his
interesting
name.
little footnote in history.
Right. Somehow, I'm sure I could go back to the school, get a copy of my transcripts and find his name. I feel like his first name might have been John, and it might have started with an H, but God, I don't know.
That's all right. Well, good for him for encouraging you to, whoever it was, to encourage you to move further with it.
Right. So, to tell you a little bit about why, as I'm, reading, first, I'm just setting these articles aside, thinking, this is something. And the reasons that I felt that this property was, and why I ended up writing about it, was because the property originally belonged to one of our founding fathers of Mokena, McGovney. It was stayed within that family. The McGovney family got passed down to Elijah McGovney, and then they ended up selling the property to Fred Yunker, and the property's only been associated with those two families, the McGovneys and the Yunkers. Fred and Carrie Yunker had a son named Edwin, and he was also significant to our town because he founded, he was one of the, I guess if you'd call him the founding fathers of the Park District. He established the Park District here in Mokena. So those are two significant people in our town that makes our town what it is today. The fact, with the McGovney settling on he was a squatted on that property, took this property, it became his, and in the town grew because of that man, one of our two founding fathers, and then Yunker creating the Park District that we still that is what it is today with everything. I thought, wow, this is really something.
Absolutely. Your instructor or your professor had told you should go further with this. What do you do then? What's the first steps you took?
Well, at the time, I was a member of the Mokena Area Historical Society, and I thought, this is why I'm a member of this historical society. This is something that maybe we should do, and I brought it up with them, and there wasn't much interest in it. They didn't think. Or at least the way they presented it to me, that we've talked about it before. That it's not possible. It's not going to happen. I didn't understand it myself. I thought, I don't know. I've got people telling me, and what I found, this seems like it can happen. But I realized I wasn't getting any help or support from the historical society. So I just thought, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it because it was strange. Whenever I'd go onto that property too, I always had some kind of a calling. Like I felt like I couldn't stop. I had to see this through. I knew, I guess, from my class, the first steps, I had to contact the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. The way you go about presenting something, you work with them. There was a woman at the time that I spoke with a lot, Amy Easton, and she guided me through the process, and I'd send her information that I found. I had to do a lot of research about the architecture, when houses, and the house was built, the different buildings, and that any changes that have been done to the property. I had gotten a copy of, I think the group, it was an architecture group that the Park District had brought in to, I don't know what the word is, investigator, just kind of research the properties. So I used that architectural document for a lot of my findings about the different structures on the property. I think it might have been from Amy too. There was an important thing with registering it to this thing I learned about called a view shed, where you would sit. The property is not just the buildings that are on the north side of the street, but also the south side of the street, and the view that you could see from sitting on the front porch, and how it was still intact from what it was back when the McGovneys lived there. So this view shed was an important thing too, that the area around it had not been disrupted, and you could go there and be basically almost like taken back in time. That was the process, working back and forth with Amy Easton, and then I have this book here, the National Register Bulletin, that are the guidelines for completing the National Register, and everything that you need to do. And then she would tell me, okay, this is working, this isn't, I want you to find out more about this and that, until I had a complete application.
What kind of things were you pulling together at that point?
Mostly dates and history about the buildings and the people.
What did that involve? Were you going through the library, through the journals or the reports?
Mostly, I mean, as far as the structures, this document from Ayers Architects was, they had a lot of the research done for me where I got a lot of the details about the different buildings because that was something they needed to create for the park district. So there was a lot there, and old documents, whatever I could find from the library that was written about it and the people that were involved. At the time, too, when I had figured that this property was worthy of being listed on the register, one thing that I had found that a property to be listed, there's a bunch of different criteria that can be looked at to deem whether a property is worthy of being listed or not. And I had felt that not only did the farm meet one criteria, but it met three. So the three areas at the beginning that I felt made this property worthy was that the property is associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history here in Mokena. It also met the significance of the property being associated with the lives of persons significant in our past, as I already mentioned, the McGovneys and the Yunkers. And I felt, too, that the property embodied distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction that represented the work that goes on of a master or possesses high artistic values or represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components lack individual distinction. That's the specific thing out of the specific statement out of the application. In the end, I think that was part of Amy Easton's guidance to me was, even though I felt that it met three, we needed to narrow it down into what, we really could entered under. We ended up not entering it under the characteristics of the type or construction of the buildings because over the years there have been a lot of changes to it, and that, which in and of itself is kind of significant because you can almost, see where, the house has changed over time in different periods, but I think it wasn't necessarily enough. But the significant people were important, and I believe in the end we ended up narrowing it down to just one, which was associating it with events that have made a significant contribution to our town. And the main event that it really fell under was exploration and settlement and agriculture. As I mentioned, it was the first settlement in the town, and it's still there intact, hadn't been developed yet or anything like that. So it is the original settlement. And agriculture was, what the town was originally founded on. The Rock Island came through here. There was, agriculture built up this tiny little town. And so those were the main significance. And the property still is associated with agriculture. There's still a living farm on that property. So it's been around for a very long time under those significant events.
So as you're pulling different documents or you're going through the documents you have, is it an application, a physical application you're filling out?
It is, yes. It is a physical application that you have to fill out the entire thing and submit it. And once I had that completed, Amy Easton, sent me a letter, and informed me somehow that this was ready, that it had been accepted on the state level because basically the state has to accept it, and then the state presents it to the national register on a national level. The state has to submit it basically. Okay. And then so when this happened, and I was invited to come down to Springfield to present. I had to bring pictures and documents and introduce it and talk about it, give a narrative about it and why we were nominating it. So once I had gotten that phone call to say we're doing this is going to happen on March whatever, can you come down to Springfield and do this? I went back to the Historical Society and I told them, remember when I mentioned a few years ago that I wanted to nominate this and we didn't think it was possible. Well, guess what? I've been researching it these past few years and working with the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and they feel strongly about it, and it's being nominated in March of this year. And everybody in the room, they're just, the blank stares, jaws hit the table, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, people started hooting and hollering and were excited and couldn't believe this was happening. I didn't know what was happening at that point, but little did I know. I think this is why this was my calling. All of these people in the room that told me it couldn't be done and that it wasn't going to happen, they've looked at it before. This was all something they secretly wanted and knew it had this value. But I'm not a politician. I don't get involved in politics, but this was a very important property that was acquired by the Park District. Between the village and the village trustees and the Park District commissioners, I guess they were always kind of trying to figure out what are we going to do with this property now that we have it. And incidentally, I mean, but when the Yunkers sold the property to the Park District, they didn't have to do that. They could have very easily sold it to a developer, had it developed like all the other subdivisions around here, and made easily double, maybe even triple what they sold it to the Park District for. So, I mean, even though they sold it for, God, I don't even remember what the price is. Matt probably has those details, but just keep in mind, whatever it was, they could have easily gotten triple for it. But the reason they sold it to the Park District was because of their affiliation with the Park District, and they wanted to keep this farm alive and as a working farm. They didn't want to see their land developed. They saw as the community was developing and more subdivisions were coming out, that, the agriculture that founded this town was disappearing, and they didn't want to see that disappear. They wanted it to have educational significance to future generations, to not forget about what this town was founded on and what it was all about, and why it became the booming little suburb that it is, based on the agriculture and that. So that was significant, and I think that was what was drawing me this calling about the property. And so then I find out, as I mentioned this to the Historical Society, that there is all this kind of bureaucratical butting of heads up here. And the one gentleman laughed about it. They're like, okay, we've got the Park District and the village up here just fighting over this property. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? And here comes little Jennifer Medema, and she just walks right through and just walks underneath all these politicians and just goes to Springfield and does it. Now what are we going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. We're going to get it listed. It's happening, and so from there they kind of guided me, and there was a huge election coming up in the Park District where there were going to be some new commissioners being nominated, and that were strong candidates, and these were a couple of individuals that felt strongly like I did about this property and wanted to see something done with this property. So they kind of introduced me to these two individuals, and Bob Lindblom is still active in the Park District today, and he was one of those two. And for the life of me, I feel bad. The other gentleman, his name escapes me, but those two decided, they asked if they could come down to Springfield with me and escort me down there. So I said, absolutely. So they were by my side, and then I started working together with the Park District. Those individuals did get elected at the time, and so there was some positive change going on with the Park District and that property, and people that really did want to preserve this property and welcomed the significance of this. So then I started working with the Park District. They brought me down, and I presented this to the agency, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. And then from there, we waited, and a few months later, we got the notice that it was accepted to be listed on the register.
Back to talking a little bit about the application process and the application itself. There's quite a few really cool pictures included in the application, and you took those yourself? Is that right?
No, I walked through the property somehow, and I'm not sure if it was after I brought this up to the Historical Society or what. Because I feel like possibly our mayor at the time, Joe Warner, may have been the one to introduce me, interestingly enough, to Tricia Fleischer, who is our current mayor's daughter. I believe she was a photography major at the time in school, and part of the application was that I needed to submit black and white photos of the property, of all of the buildings in that. I believe it was Joe I didn't know Trisha at the time, or the Fleischers, but he said, hey, I know, this person's daughter is, photography major. Maybe she could take the photos for you. So I contacted her. She was excited to do that. So she worked with me. So all these photos I have on the table, all these black and whites, her and I together walked around through all of the property and, taking pictures of everything from different angles, the whole property, the whole view of the entire property, down to little details of pieces of the architecture, how it's constructed, each individual building inside there, and different things that were left inside of the buildings, like this photo down here, this old cart. It was a dairy farm, and things like that. So we just took pictures of everything. Not all of these photos obviously were submitted into the application, but it was just an interesting thing to do, to go through it and document it the way it was left to the park district.
Absolutely.
And then from there I picked out what were the photos I was going to submit into the application.
So talk a little bit about just what it was like walking through, the old house and those buildings.
It's just very peaceful, like transported into time. Seeing these old things, the old buildings, the way things were, and just sort of left behind. I would often just go to that property by myself during the time that I was doing this application, just maybe to get inspiration in that. And the buildings weren't as locked up as they are now. I'd go inside the barn and sit in there and think about it as I, was working on it and stuff, and just to kind of look around in that. And it was just some sort of like peacefulness, and kind of like I said, it almost felt like a calling, like I had to be there. I had to do this for the previous families, the ancestors of this property. I even got, and I have an email here too, somehow I got in touch with Lisa Wells, who's one of the grandchildren of Edwin Junker, and I talked to her too about what it was like growing up there, and asked her a lot of questions about the property.
Well, looking at back to the application and the photos that are included, and one thing we're going to do is include a link to the register, or I don't know what you call it, the National Register, where this is listed.
Yeah.
So anybody reading can take a look and see at the application itself that was submitted, and part of that is these pictures. So on page 41, it starts with a beautiful outside picture of the farmhouse itself. So do you want to describe these or talk about these a little bit as we go through them?
Sure. The one thing that's really interesting about the house that I found very intriguing is I'm sure there were additions put on over time. That I know that the Junkers added some additions to the house, but what was really unique about it being inside a real working farmhouse that I didn't know is upstairs where the bedrooms are. They would have I think they called them tenant farmers that would come in and help out on the land and work the land. And so when they were there working, helping to harvest the crop or that, they stayed with the Junker family in their house. And so there's rooms that almost look like giant, like what in today's day and age a house would have. There are probably some people in this town that have walk-in closets bigger than these rooms. And these were bedrooms. And in these bedrooms, they had these real crudely makeshift bunk beds. And I know we did a walkthrough recently, and some of the people didn't realize. I said, these are bunk beds. They just look like old,
they do,
cruddy shelving units or something. Yeah. I'm like, oh no, those are beds actually. And it's just like a plywood base and some 4x4s for legs, and they were kind of stacked up. And then they put a mattress. What's gone from this now is that there'd be a mattress and a pillow on there and a blanket, and after they'd work the farm, they'd come in, have a meal with the family, and go up to bed and sleep in, there's, I don't know how many, there's, at least a half dozen, if not more, these beds in these gigantic like closet rooms or whatever in the house. And then they'd get up before sunrise and get out there again and work the land. So it's just something, I am not from a farming community at all. I don't know any, didn't know anything before that, but just to see these beds in there and how they worked, together and made sure that their farmers were right there with them and, had a good place to stay and slept right in the home with them. They didn't have to go sleep out in the barn. They were right in their house sleeping with them. And that was really interesting to see. Looking at
this first picture of the front view of the house, and you see the front porch. Well, for one, this is the picture that we use as our photo for the podcast, which you're nice enough to let us use. But standing from that porch, you see the significance of the view shed that you talk about before.
Right.
And so kind of maybe talk about that from this view of standing on the front porch. You still see basically what the Younkers were looking at years ago.
Exactly. So what a view shed is, it's sort of a triangular path of what the eye could see. So you can imagine if you were like, after a day of farming or whatever, or maybe on a Sunday afternoon that is a peaceful day that you don't work, you might be sitting, a Yunker or McGovney would be sitting on that porch having a glass of lemonade, just relaxing and looking out. So from their point of view, you can imagine like with peripheral vision and that you take that's the point of the triangle, and it goes out, kind of cascading out over across the street into like a wider and wider triangle of what the eye can see. And it's this land across LaPorte Road, and behind the grassy area there is very old, like our oak, I think they're oak trees, right? Like the oak forest. And that's the same forest of trees that was there when this land was founded, when this house was built that they looked at. And this view shed was very significant in being listed and added to this nomination, because at the time that I was doing this, the Oaks was not built yet. And the Park District was in the process. They had plans of building the Oaks. And that building originally was supposed to be built a little bit more east than where it is. Where they were going to build it was smack in the middle of the view shed.
Oh, wow.
Which would have destroyed the view that could be seen from that front porch. And because of the significance of this view shed, and working together with the Park District, once they realized that this property was going to be listed on the National Register and how important that was to the community and to them, they decided to move the Oaks back. The property was large enough. They reconfigured the buildings exactly, as far as I know, is exactly what they had drew up and had planned, but they just had to move it back a little bit further west to not disturb this view shed.
And the buildings that sit directly across from the farm are also part of the register as well? Is that's in the view shed?
Yes. Those are buildings that are part of the Yunker,
the silo and on the south side.
Corn bin or something, right. I think over there. Yeah.
Okay. And then so next in the pictures that you show us some of the inside of the house, the living room, I think it is, with the fireplace. That room
here with the fireplace, that was an addition put on to the house. It's a little bit more modern, family room addition, as they say there.
And then you have a picture of the kitchen. Mm-hmm. You could tell, there were a lot of family meals cooked here.
Right. That's a very big stove.
Show. Yeah. And then some of the second floor photos.
Right. A doorway, looking into a doorway, the way, you walk through one room to get into another room. This is a really great photo of that kind of,
this is page 51.
Collects, the entire, property with a number of buildings, of the original buildings all in one. And interestingly enough, if you take a look at this photo right here and then look on my wall, it's the same thing. There was an artist, Ted Fuqua, who painted a lot of the local buildings, old, that's not obviously the only one, but he went around towns, not just Mokena, but he's from Mokena. And, so obviously he felt this was a really great angle of the property too, kind of grabbing all of the main significant buildings into this one view and the house. And it's just a beautiful view. And actually, after I had gotten this listed on the register, my husband at the time had gotten in touch with Ted Fuqua, and knowing that this painting or drawing existed from him, he bought that for me kind of as a, congratulations for the hard work of doing everything that I did. And there were only 100 prints of this drawing made by Ted Fuqua, and he at the time was trying to get me number one, because that would be the smaller the number, the more significant or value it is or whatever. So, and he felt bad that the number one was taken. He couldn't. The lowest number that he could find that he could get his hands on was number 4, and I said, actually, that's perfect. It's significant because it took me 4 years to get this listed on the register. So it was better than number 1. And I actually have it autographed. I met Ted Fuqua and he autographed it on the back as well.
Interestingly enough, sorry to interrupt, when I spoke to Mr. David Kropp, he spoke about this barn and how when he was a kid, they used to play basketball in there. And there was a basketball hoop, a court, and I told him, I said, we walked through it earlier this year, and that basketball hoop is still there. They're still playing basketball. So he thought that was pretty neat, and I think so too, to know that all that time ago, kids were still playing basketball in that barn.
Wow, I know you see all these hundreds of pictures that I have here. I know, I was sharing them with a friend the other night, and I actually showed him that. I was like, look, here's the basketball hoop. So I've got multiple prints of this. I should give Dave a copy of that basketball hoop, since he has fond memories of that.
Yeah. I wanted to show, there's a great picture of the cupola, which was recently replaced by the Park District as well.
Yes.
With 2 beautiful shining copper cupolas.
Right. And the new ones that they put up are just gorgeous. Or I don't know if I'd have to look at a photo side by, actually I did take a photo of the new ones side by side, but I mean, they look very much, if they're not exact replicas, they're very similar to that original photo that you see there. So they did a great job in replicating what was there originally. But they just kind of, it was time, as anything, old houses stuff needs to get replaced.
Sure.
So if you could do it with historical accuracy, that's great.
And then there's one here on page 59 that is the lower level main barn dairy. Yeah. And I know you'd said previously to me that these stanchions are now gone, right?
Right.
So it's neat. I think it really holds the history of that picture, and imagining, that barn full of cows.
Right. I know the angle of this picture. It's just a really, really cool picture. That was one area. I don't know why. I never, but I liked going down there. There's just something cool about it, and I can't really say what it is, but yes, you can almost picture all the cows where, when they'd come in, and that's where they sort of stayed at night, and, all in a row, and they have their little water troughs there and that. And it was just really, really cool to see. Now, you'd have to talk with the Park District people to find out, why they took it down. When I took a peek in there once and discovered that it was all gone, I was disappointed. If there's any plans to renovate or restore the buildings to their original glory, it would be great to, we've got this picture, we know exactly what it looks like. If it can be, replicated, just for, historical accuracy and educational purposes.
Absolutely. Both my grandfathers were farmers or grew up on farms. And so that picture to me, me and my cousins used to play in a barn that had cows in it, similar to that. And so it's a great picture. I'm glad it's part of that. And another great picture here of the inside of the farm, the main barn.
Yeah, no, that's right upstairs, right above the area the cows were housed. Oh yeah, there. That one. That was my for whatever reason. That's my favorite. That was my favorite building on the property, the chicken coop.
Page 67.
Yeah, there is just something about the character of that old building and all those windows in a row.
Where was this? Where did this sit on the property?
Barn is east of the house. Directly north of the house, which would be behind the house, is like the smoke shed, and so there are those two little red buildings here. Then if you kept going west, all those trees were there. It would have been directly west of the two red buildings behind it, the smoke house and the other one. Yeah, and that was my favorite building. Unfortunately, it's not there. It was in from my understanding from the Park District, it was just in really bad shape. So they chose to take it down. And incidentally, that one was green. All the other buildings were, maybe that's partially why I liked it too. Everything else, there was the White House, every other farm building was red, and then this little chicken coop was green and white.
So Jen, just talk a little bit. We see the signs and everything now. Everybody knows the park, the farm as Yunker Farm. But the register, it's listed as the McGovney Yunker Farm. Tell why that was significant to keep that name.
That was something that Amy Easton from the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency said to me. That was one of her directives in entering it, because, as I mentioned earlier, the significance of people that were associated with this property. So Mokena had two founding fathers, McGovney and Denny, and being associated with McGovney is a strong event that ties it to its significance on the register. So it was important to keep his name as part of it. And as I mentioned too, there's just the two families. Everybody here around the Yunkers were such a huge, prominent family in this town. Everybody knows the people in this town that have been living here, for years, since their childhood, and that remember, like up until at least 1999, that he'd walk those cows across the street. It would stop traffic to get the cows to go graze in the grass on the south side of LaPorte. So everybody knows the Yunkers, and that's just been known in town as Yunker Farm. And but truly, again, there's two families that are significant to that property, and so we needed to include the name McGovney. And actually, I think if you go to the farm now, the way it is, they've got that new band shell that's out there. That's great, and it's really wonderful that they did that to get people sitting on the land and enjoying, music, and that it's just great to see this property being utilized. And I noticed I walk my dog past there all the time, and they have this really neat, like, kind of red farm looking sign that does refer to it as Yunker Farm. At some point along the line, the Park District kind of dropped that McGovney name again. This got listed on the register back in 2006, I think, so quite a number of years have gone by. So people in the community might still refer to it as a nice abbreviation, Yunker Farm, but I usually myself will refer to it as McGovney Yunker Farm.
And that makes sense when you know the significance of that. So tell a little bit, what happened after the property was listed? What was the reaction in town? I think there was some newspaper articles.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could see her during my whole process as it was getting closer. There's been multiple articles written about the property, that this was happening, that it was being presented when it happened, and everybody was really excited about it, and they're proud to have this nationally significant property in our town. And at the time, here I have a plaque. The Park District presented to me this plaque of appreciation for all of the work that I did in putting this on there. So they were very, appreciative of the efforts and the accolades that come to having an important piece of history in town. So that was presented to me at a Farm and Barn Fest. So that was really, really great that everybody was excited about it.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad they recognize it. It's nice to have the articles that are still around, the newspaper articles documenting a little bit. And I hopefully this as well kind of adds some further background for the community to understand the significance of the farm, as well as how important it is that the farm is on the register, and that there's a lot of communities that don't have that. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
For putting the time into that. I'm sure that's why a lot of those people on the Historical Society didn't go through it, because they maybe understood how long of a commitment it was. So
right, I had no idea. It's funny reading these articles. You could see, like, me being quoted that I had no idea at the time what I was getting myself into, how much work it actually was going to be. I thought, I wrote this paper. It's good. Like, little did I know there was a lot more I had to do to get it exactly ready to get accepted. And
we're going to include the link to the National Register so everybody can read and see the pictures that we talked about here, and anything else that we think might be interesting. Really appreciate you sitting down with me today, and really appreciate the work that you did. And I hope the community continues to appreciate that for a long time. So thank you very much, Jen. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for taking the time to interview me for this and kind of relive the past of doing this. It's a lot of fun digging everything up.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
The things that make a community great are not always flashy and might not be worth the time to some. But when we look back, we're grateful for the investment that those people have been willing to make in order to preserve a piece of our history. There have been many people through the years that Mokena has been a dot on the map that have been committed to preserving its story. Jennifer Medema is one of those people, and her 4 years of hard work to get the farm listed on the National Register of Historic Places is no small feat. I hope that as the years go by and time moves on, her contribution is remembered and acts as a guidepost for future generations to keep and maintain the pieces of our history that still remain. Thank you for listening to this episode of Mokena's Front Porch. If you're enjoying our podcast, please be sure to share it with your friends and family. We would also love it if you'd be willing to leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening to our podcast. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Mokena's Front Porch.